Hi, my name is Thomas Gibbs with usfranchisevisa.com, and in this video we'll discuss investor visas with Lisa Khan. I've been practicing exclusively in the immigration field for 22 years with a focus on business and family immigration. She's a graduate of the University of Michigan Law School. Her office is located in Orlando, Florida. She's able to represent clients anywhere in the United States or abroad, as immigration is federal and not state law. She's also active in the American Immigration Lawyers Association since 1997 and has held many different leadership positions within the association. So we are in very good hands with Lisa, and we thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to sharing some information with you today.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in law.
Well, how I got started, I guess, in immigration law in particular, I had a sense that I wanted to do something with an international flavor to it. I was a political science business major in undergrad, and when I was in law school, I wasn't quite sure what that would lead me to. I didn't know if it would be some sort of consular work or political work or international trade or transactional type law, but I always had an interest in international in general. And to be honest, as a US citizen born and kind of raised in the Midwest, I didn't even really know much about immigration law or that it was a field until I met an immigration attorney, and then that kind of piqued my interest. After I graduated from law school, I did some soul searching as to what field of law I really might enjoy, and met with several immigration attorneys, and really kind of clicked with one of the attorneys that I met with and ended up working with her, and she became my mentor. And it's a perfect fit for me. I love what I do. It's a challenging area. It's a rewarding area as well. I feel that I am able to make a small difference in people's lives in either being able to pursue the dream of moving to the United States and, invest in and buy businesses, or to be able to take up employment based on a job offer, to be, with family. So it's a really interesting area of practice, and I really enjoy it very much. I feel like it's my passion.
That's great. I think I see a lot of successful people having mentors earlier on in their career, and
Yes.
Those mentors really influencing them for the best. So that's
It's made a big difference in my life.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. So tell us, what is an E2 visa?
Okay, so an E2 visa is a treaty investor visa. It's called a treaty investor visa because we have to have a treaty in place between the US and one's country of nationality for an individual to be eligible to apply for an E2 treaty investor visa. So one of the very first things that I'll do when I have a foreign national client that might be interested in investing in the US or indicates they are interested in E2 visa potentially, we have to make sure we have that treaty in place. And there's a list of the treaties on the State Department website, which countries we have the treaty with. Interestingly, we have, I guess it's maybe some of the countries that we don't have treaties with that we have to be mindful of. We don't have a treaty with India, Brazil, Venezuela, and at least where I'm located in the Central Florida area, there's a fair amount of immigration from those countries, and they don't qualify for the E2 strictly based on the lack of a treaty. It's always important to inquire whether someone has dual nationality, because sometimes I might have a Brazilian client that also has a Spanish passport, or it could be that a spouse has dual nationality or a different nationality, and we might be able to do the E2 investor visa through a spouse. So that's really important right from the get-go, is determining one's nationality. Once we've kind of cleared that hurdle of knowing that we're okay on that, the essential requirements for an E2 investor visa is that an individual is making a substantial investment into a U.S. business, has to be a commercial enterprise as opposed to, someone buying a second home and then wanting to get an investor visa based on that investment. That's really not a business. We need to show that the individual is coming to direct and develop the business, and that the business is not marginal, or it has the ability to be non-marginal. So what does all that really kind of mean? A substantial investment is really relative to the nature and value of the business that someone's investing in. So if they're buying an existing business, let's say they're buying an existing franchise, or they're buying a franchise opportunity and they may be buying a franchise location, zip code, or they're buying a business outright, and we've got some kind of a value or a purchase price affiliated with what the investment's going to be. Let's say it's $150,000 is the purchase price, or maybe the franchise cost to buy a business. The substantial investment then generally would be 75% or more of the value of the business. So in a scenario where someone is going to buy a business that's valued at $150,000, if they're going to pay $150,000 cash, that's fine. That's a substantial investment. They're putting in 100%. In that same scenario, if they said, well, we've got $125,000 to invest, but the seller is willing to finance $25,000 through a promissory note, that's okay too, because they're still putting in a substantial amount right from the start. If we're looking at a business for $150,000 and someone says, I've got $50,000 to invest, but the seller is willing to finance $100,000, we're going to have a problem because that initial investment isn't considered substantial. If the business is a higher dollar value business, let's say it's an $800,000 business, then there's a bit of a sliding scale as far as what is substantial, and we could get away with perhaps as low as a 50% investment. So someone's saying, I've got $400,000 cash, buying a business for $800,000 and is financing the balance. That would be okay, where you've got a higher dollar value business. It's also possible to do an E2 investor visa for an upstart business where somebody's starting a business from scratch. There may not be a purchase price obviously affiliated with that, but what we have to do in that scenario is pretty much kind of itemized. These are all the costs to get this business to a point where it's ready to open its doors or it's operational. And if that amount is, say, $100,000 for someone to open a new cafe, for example, they're going to have to put in a substantial portion of that. I think a lot of folks feel a bit nervous about a new upstart business because you really do have to start spending the money. If it's a restaurant or a retail store or something like that, they're going to have to sign a lease, start building out the space, start buying equipment, inventory, and whatnot before they can apply for the visa. So some people feel nervous about spending the money before they have the visa in hand, but that's what you've got to do with a new business. For an existing business or a franchise opportunity, typically to show substantial investment without maybe necessarily having to fully commit the funds and not get them back if something went awry with the visa, most folks will have an agreement with a contingency clause in it that if for some reason the visa is not issued, funds that have been transferred are now invested and are being held in an escrow account by a closing attorney would be, that if the visa is not issued, those funds will go back to the investor. In that way, where we've transferred funds and have them sitting in escrow with a purchase agreement or franchise agreement, the U.S. government, whether it's the consulate or U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services that's adjudicating the application, they can see that the funds have been invested or committed, that they're out of the investor's control, they're in escrow, and there is a contractual agreement. So I would say 9 out of 10 of my clients generally tend to prefer maybe buying an existing business or a franchise opportunity rather than starting something from scratch, just because I think they feel they have a little bit of a safety net that they've, can invest that money, but if anything went south with the visa, they would get the funds back and not be stuck with a bunch of inventory or location in a business they can't run. With regard to the other component, really two other components, I guess, with the E2, we need to show that the investor is coming to develop and direct the business. That's usually pretty straightforward. The government tends to be, pretty flexible. If somebody says, well, look, I'm a retired police officer, I'm now going to be buying a pool cleaning company. I don't really have experience in pool cleaning. As long as they've got a skill set and an ability to direct and develop the business, we don't usually have any issues with kind of that component. So it doesn't have to be something that somebody already has experience in. It can be a new venture, maybe a passion of theirs or something that they're interested in doing. And as long as they're capable of directing and developing a business, that's usually pretty straightforward. As far as a business that's non-marginal, basically what the government would like to see is that an individual is investing into a business that is going to create some employment for others, whether that's direct employees, or subcontractors, and whether it's part-time or full-time. There's no set number. Sometimes I hear people say, oh, I'm under the impression that you have to hire 3 full-time US workers to get an E2. It's not necessarily the case. There's no set number. It's just a matter of creating some other employment for others. The government doesn't like if an individual is going to invest, let's say a husband and wife, in a let's say a lawn care company, and they're going to do everything. The husband's going to mow all the lawns for the clients and the wife is going to handle the office, and they're not really creating any employment for others. That would be something that they'd look at, and that would be difficult. The other, I guess, component with the marginality issue, other than some kind of job or employment creation, is that they'd like to see that the E2 business is able to produce enough income or more than enough income than just to provide a subsistence living to the investor and his or her family. So if it's a family of 4 coming in on an investor visa, we want to make sure that the business is one that really can provide a sufficient salary and or profit to sustain a family of 4, certainly above a poverty guideline amount of living. So that kind of in a nutshell is the E2 visa. And that's just a real quick sketch, but that gives you an overview of the main criteria.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa.
It's worth noting too that it's a non-immigrant visa, so it's not a green card or permanent residence in the US. It's a temporary visa, but it can be renewed generally indefinitely. If someone is, running a business and it's doing well, they can keep getting renewals of that visa. And family members can come along. A spouse can come along as an E2 dependent, and children under the age of 21 can come along as dependents and be able to live in the US. Children can go to school in the US up until, while they're on the E2 visa, but they don't get work authorization. The spouse of an individual on an E2 investor visa is entitled to a work card or work authorization once they're in the US.
Okay. Great. No, that's a wonderful overview. It sounds like a lot of the employment and finance side of getting into an E2 is, well, it's not loose. It's not strictly defined as it must be this amount, it must be this many people. So do you find that gives more people a lot of flexibility in utilizing this visa, or does that almost make it the opposite?
No, I think that it allows for more room for flexibility as well as creativity in putting forth an E2 visa application, because the rules are not so very strict that the investment must be 100,000 or more and 3 US workers or more. It does allow room for flexibility. We've done visas for certainly investments under 100,000. And for businesses that might not have any direct employees but may rely solely on subcontract personnel. Some businesses are home-based businesses. We don't have to have physical premises or a lease for a business if it's a business that can be run, out of someone's home. Many service businesses are run out of an individual's home, for example. In the Central Florida area where I am, real close to Disney, we have a lot of second homes, vacation homes, and many visitors to the U.S. Prefer to stay in a vacation home or vacation villa, maybe a 3-bedroom pool home for their family while they're, visiting in the U.S. So we have a lot of property management companies in the Orlando area. And if someone's on an E2 visa with a property management company, that might be a business that they run out of their home, but they're creating employment for pool cleaners and pest control and lawn care companies and that sort of thing in managing, those second homes or properties. And that's perfectly fine for an E2 visa, for example.
Great. Yeah, that's interesting because that allows for great flexibility. You don't have to have them as W-2 employees. It sounds too like the indirect impact of the business helping other businesses is considered into the equation.
Exactly. Most of the time, if a business is, up and running and it's time to renew the visa, the renewals are pretty straightforward. The only times I think that people run into trouble when they're needing to renew their E2 visa and not getting it renewed would be if the business has really failed or floundered or they've closed its doors, then you're not going to get a new visa. Or if it really is a marginal business, if they're just eking by, or maybe they're not really able to live off the revenue or the proceeds from the business, but the spouse has a work card and a good job and they're living off of the spouse's income, that can be problematic because at the end of the day, the U.S. government wants to see that the business itself is not marginal. And if the family is doing okay, but only because they've got income from other sources, that can be tricky for getting a renewal.
That certainly makes a lot of sense.
And one thing that's probably interesting or important to note is that depending upon one's country of nationality, the duration of the visa can vary. So for example, someone from the UK or from Canada, the maximum period of time for the E2 visa is 5 years. So they might get a 5-year visa right from the get-go, and they don't have to renew for another 5 years. Some countries have a lesser period of time, and again, it's kind of negotiated at treaty level. I know, for example, Thailand, the E2 visa is only issued for 6 months, which is a bit problematic because someone who's traveling frequently in and out of the US would need to keep renewing that visa, and that can be a bit of a deal killer for some. Interestingly, once an individual obtains the actual visa and the visa is applied for at the US embassy or consulate in the investor's home country, if they have a 6-month visa, a 1-year visa, or a 5-year visa, when they come into the US, they're admitted for a 2-year period. So you can have a 6-month visa, but the admission to the US and the stay in the US is for 2 years. Similarly, you can have a 5-year visa, but you're not admitted for 5 years into the E2, you're admitted for 2 years. And then before that 2-year stay expires, usually someone would travel out, come back in, and they get a fresh 2 years.
Well, this is exactly why we would want to retain knowledgeable counsel in this, because there's a lot of intricate details that overlook.
There really are, it's very true. And if someone is picking up and moving to a new country and bringing their family, it's a big decision. It's a big commitment. And I think it's very important that they understand the pros, cons, the ins and outs, and the nuances of the E2 visa from the very start. And I'm always surprised at how much maybe misinformation is out there, or folks have come in on an E2 but don't really even understand, that they're admitted for 2 years. Why didn't I get a 5-year admission? And so it's surprising to me that sometimes people don't really understand what they've gotten themselves into, fully. And then they find out once they're here, oh, okay, now I understand. And I think, wow, you really should have all those answers, or at least that information before coming here. So I think it really is important that somebody works with a good immigration attorney right from the start. It certainly doesn't have to be me, but a good legal advice is really key. I've seen people fall out of status or find themselves unlawfully present in the U.S., not really through any fault of their own, but through bad advice or bad lawyering, and that's really sad when you see something like that happen.
Lisa, you kind of indirectly bring up a good point. There's lots of immigration attorneys out there, but there's not many that do these investor visas. So, if I have an attorney friend that I happen to know that, they practice in immigration, but they've never done an E2,
right?
Is that still a good attorney, or should I be working with a specialist?
It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who's doing their first E2 isn't going to do a good job or be a good attorney. But I think it's important for an individual who's hiring an attorney to do an E2 to have an understanding of whether or not this is someone's area of practice, if they've done E2s before, if they understand the differences, per country among the E2s. So if I was going to be investing, I would probably prefer to work with somebody who really knows E2s and does a lot of E2s. Similarly, if I was in deportation or removal proceedings, I wouldn't hire me because I don't handle that type of work. Yes, I'm an immigration attorney. Yes, I'm capable of representing someone before an immigration judge in deportation proceedings, but it's not my area of specialty. So I wouldn't be a good choice, I think, to represent someone. I would rather have somebody that does that type of work day in and day out and really knows how it works. And I think that's probably true in any area of law. I also feel a little nervous for folks sometimes that might work with an attorney that handles immigration, but also does bankruptcy and litigation and family. And if you've got someone that's dabbling in a little bit of everything, that's exactly what you're getting. Somebody who's dabbling in a little bit of everything, but maybe doesn't really have the knowledge, the depth of knowledge needed in immigration. And then, of course, within immigration, you've got folks that specialize in business immigration, and those that do more court work, and those that do family. And so those are really good questions to ask for somebody who is looking to hire an attorney. Yeah.
So really make sure we're getting a specialist in the E2 and investor category.
I think so. Yeah. I do a lot of E2s. I really enjoy the E2 work, and it's something that, so they say the best way to learn is through doing. So, the longer you practice and the more cases you do, the more you learn. And sometimes you learn the hard way. That's true of everyone in life. But I've learned a heck of a lot about E2s over the years, that's for sure.
Awesome. What about one of the other more popular investor visas, the EB-5? What's the difference?
So there's a big difference. The EB-5 and the E2 are both investor visas. The E2 is a non-immigrant visa, so it's not permanent residence in the US. It allows an individual to be able to invest in a business, come to the US, live and work here, and to renew that visa as long as they continue to qualify. The EB-5 is an EB-5 stands for the employment-based fifth preference category. It's an immigrant visa, or essentially a route to permanent residence or a green card. There are various employment-based categories or routes of being able to obtain permanent residence, and they're broken down into preference categories. So the immigrant investor visa is the fifth preference category. The EB-5 requires essentially $1 million investment into a new U.S. business and creation of at least 10 full-time jobs for U.S. workers. And the U.S. workers have to be direct employees, can't be subcontractors. If the investment is in a rural area or an area of high unemployment, then the investment amount can be reduced to $500,000, but the investor still has to create jobs for 10 full-time U.S. workers. When the EB-5 program first came out in the late 90s, I think immigration thought there'd be a rush of people investing in the U.S., maybe setting up a new manufacturing facility, putting in over $1 million and hiring more than 10 U.S. workers. The threshold is pretty high, at least 1 million plus 10 U.S. workers, 500,000 if it's a rural area or high unemployment area. A lot of folks will say, look, I need to put 1 million or more into my business, but I'm never going to need 10 full-time workers, or maybe I'm going to need 20 people, but all subcontractors, and that's problematic. Or folks that might say, I'm going to hire more than 10 direct employees, but I can start my business for 200,000. So, the two go hand in hand. The EB-5 that we've kind of just briefly discussed is a direct investment, and investors directly investing into a new company. A spin-off of the EB-5 is indirect investment. And when the EB-5 first came out, it was meant for direct investment for people putting money into new businesses and creating jobs. And then this concept of indirect investment evolved, and now that's probably, I'd say 95% or more of all EB-5s is indirect investment. That entails investing into what are called regional centers. Those are investment projects around the country. I think one of the first ones was in Seattle. I don't know if it was an area of urban blight, but maybe an area of high unemployment. It qualified for the $500,000 investment. And the project was in need of many millions of dollars to come to fruition. I think they were developing shopping plazas, apartments, and office space, things like that. So that overall project needed many millions of dollars. And what they said is, okay, we'll take multiple foreign investors. We'll allow each one to put in $500,000, and we'll attribute of all the overall job creation from this major project, we'll attribute 10 jobs to this individual and to this individual and to this individual. And so that became a way to indirectly invest into someone else's project without having to hire 10 full-time workers in your own business, and to be able to get a green card that way. So that's a popular way to get a green card as well. The tricky thing with the indirect EB-5 investment is you've got to make sure that you're putting your money into a project that's going to succeed. Some of the projects have failed, and then individuals have not only lost their $500,000, but have not gotten the green card or maybe lost the green card. So you've got to be a wise investor as to where you're putting your money. And it's still a big chunk of change. I kind of look at the EB-5 indirect investment as a way to maybe buy a green card for an individual and their family. It works for some people, particularly if they've got $500,000 or more to be able to invest, and it's not every last penny that they've had to scrape together, could be a good route. But a lot of investors that don't either have that significant amount of money or really want to invest in the business that they're going to run, won't go down that route. Many folks on the E2 aren't investing, $500 or $1 million. They're, maybe more $100,000, $200,000 investment. And though they might like the idea of doing an EB5 investment, if their financial picture really doesn't allow them to go that way, the E2 is a good way to be able to invest in a smaller business and to have a good life in the U.S. and to live here with their family. Sometimes an E2 business will start off small and then can grow into a business that we can convert to an EB5. Maybe the initial investment is $200,000, $300,000, and then over time there's additional investment and job creation. It can be possible to convert to an EB5. There can also be other routes to a green card for people on an E2. Sometimes it's through the spouse's employment, where a spouse may not be working in the E2 business, but working for another company, and that company might sponsor the spouse for permanent residence through a recruitment advertising process called labor certification. And then there's other categories for a green card as well. If somebody has extraordinary ability or they're doing work that benefits the national interest. Sometimes folks on an E2 will end up getting a green card through a family relationship. Perhaps someone has a brother who's become a citizen and files for them, or an older child who's maybe turning 20, 21, falls in love, marries a U.S. citizen, gets a green card that way, eventually becomes a citizen and files for mom and dad. And these are all, things that a good immigration attorney can help an individual explore. If they say, well, we're excited about coming in on an E2 visa, but how do we turn that into a green card down the road? Can we turn that into a green card down the road? And I think those are issues that should be addressed from the beginning as well.
And it sounds like there's ways to make that happen. It just depends on a lot of different unique factors.
Exactly.
Another good reason to have competent counsel.
Yes, I think so. It's, sometimes people say, oh gosh, a 1 hour consultation. I already know I want to do an E2. We don't really need a consultation, or I don't want to spend a few $100s for a consultation. I think it's probably the wisest money spent, really, to get good advice from the start, so that somebody knows really what they're getting into and that this is the right thing for themselves and or their family.
Yeah, what's the saying? Stepping over dollars to pick up pennies.
Right.
Yeah. So it's 2019. We're under the Trump administration. How does this administration compare to the previous administrations that we've had?
Well, that's a big question, I suppose. What I have seen, particularly with filings with USCIS, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, there's an executive order to buy American, hire American executive order, and part of that executive order is a directive to immigration to zealously enforce the immigration laws to promote that policy. So I think every other immigration attorney I've definitely seen more scrutiny, greater scrutiny of filings with immigration, an increase in the number of requests for additional evidence, cases that might have sailed through before, not sailing through now. I feel like we really have to cross every T, dot every I, and sometimes really fight hard for cases that would have been pretty straightforward. It can be frustrating, because it feels like even though the rules have not changed, the standards have changed a little bit, or the bar has shifted. With the filings at the State Department, which is the State Department, the U.S. embassies and consulates fall within the State Department, and the majority of E2 filings that we do are filed at the U.S. consulate in one's home country. That seems to be pretty much business as usual with the State Department. And they still have the Buy American, Hire American kind of order that trickles to the State Department as well. But I haven't seen as dramatic, I think, a change in the standard of adjudication with the visa applications at the consulates, which is a good thing. Another sort of fallout, I suppose, of maybe some of the directives from the current administration is the marked increase in processing times with filings with immigration. So there's been cases that might have taken 4 to 6 months perhaps in the past are now taking at least maybe twice that time. A typical green card interview might have been scheduled within 6 months of someone filing. If they married a U.S. citizen, for example, their family immigration case, sometimes we'd have an interview in 3, 4, 6 months. Now it's much closer to a year. The work cards that individuals file for as an E2 spouse, or someone on what's called L visa as a spouse, or for permanent residence, those work cards are supposed to be issued within 90 days, but in practice, they're taking about 7 months at the moment. So that's a challenge for folks, when you come in on an E2 visa and a spouse wants to get a work card and hit the ground running with being able to work. If it's taking 7 months to get a work card, that's a bit of a setback. So there's a lot of repercussions, I think, of some of the policies from the current administration that that are affecting people on business visas and employment visas. And a lot of the news seems to focus on illegal immigration, or people who have come to the U.S. either unlawfully or come in legally but have overstayed, or there's certainly the border crisis. But current policies have had an effect on employment immigration as well.
Interesting. Yeah, times only seem to change. That seems to be the constant.
Yeah, for sure.
So what if we were, say, we're looking for opportunities, we're from a treaty country, we've gotten some counsel, we know the E2 is one good viable route, and we find an independent business, it's already established, and we find a franchise business, it's already established. On paper, same industry, they make the same amount of money, same amount of employees, but one's a franchise, one's independent. Is one going to be, more likely to get approved, or would they be about the same?
Honestly, I'd say they're probably going to be about the same. And I think it really depends a bit more perhaps on the investor. If the investor feels that maybe there's a particular area that they're excited about, and there's a franchise opportunity in that area that will allow them to have the support of a franchisor. I think someone may feel more comfortable in doing that. Other individuals might find a business that has good tax returns, good books, and it's something that's not a franchise operation, but is a business that looks appealing to them, that they think that they can run, or maybe they have the skill set. Some of the franchise names that are recognizable probably lend maybe a little more credibility at times to the embassy or government officials. But both are doable if we can tick all the boxes. So I think a lot of it kind of comes down to the investor and what works for their needs and for their background.
Awesome. Well, that's great. It's better to have more options than less.
Absolutely. I always think E2, probably the hardest thing is for an individual to find the right business. Lots of people come to see me and they're excited about it. They've got the funds, they understand the visa, and then they say, well, now we need to decide what we're going to invest in. And that can be, they'll say that's probably the hardest part, is they want to find a business that's the right fit for them, something that's within their budget, in a location that they want to be in, etc. And that's where then working with someone like yourself who can work with an individual to show them what types of franchise opportunities are available, or with a business broker that is aware of businesses that are for sale, maybe in a particular area that someone's looking in. That's where those individuals come into play. So I feel like I should be the first stop for a lot of people to get a sense of what the E2 is and understand it. And then, then I'll say, get back to me now when you find the right business, or as they're looking at businesses too, I certainly work with clients to help them as they're making those decisions about what to invest in. So they may follow up with me or call and say, we're considering this business, or we're looking at a franchise, or we're looking at this. What do you think? How do you think these would work for an E2, et cetera? And then, kind of give counsel and advice to clients at that point, really from a standpoint of visa eligibility.
Okay. So if we got to that point as a client, we found that business, we had, obviously our preliminary discussions, what would maybe be like the top 1 or 2 most common stumbling blocks to getting granted the visa?
Well, we've got to, I would say that, well, I guess just to for starters, I'd say that I wouldn't put anything forward to the government if I didn't feel it was approvable. So we usually are able to make the determination if it's a solid case before we ever submit it. Not having a treaty would be a problem. Someone investing into a business that is doing poorly or is marginal doesn't necessarily mean that the business, that the E2 would not work. I've had folks come to me and say, well, we found a business that's for sale, it's within our price range, but the financials don't look that good. If we walk into this business and run it the same way, we really can't support ourselves. If that was the plan, probably would not get the visa. But there are times when an individual sees potential in a business like that and says, here's a business that's selling for $75,000. The owners are checked out, the business isn't doing well, but there's value there, and we've got maybe know-how, skill set, additional funds to turn this business around. That could still be a doable case. If someone, for the investor visa, the investor has to have at least 50% ownership of the business. So sometimes we'll see someone that says, I have a friend who's a US citizen, they have an existing business, and they want me to go into partnership with them, but they're not willing to give me more than 30% of the shares, but they're willing to sell part of the business. That's going to be difficult. Generally, as a general rule of thumb, the investor needs to have at least 50% of the business. If someone is investing a very small amount into a business, sometimes people will say, well, I want to invest in a website design and consulting business that's going to be an upstart business. I don't really need to put much money in. I'll be the sole employee, and maybe down the road I'm going to hire other people, but I could get this business off the ground for $5,000. You could make an argument that $5,000 is all it takes to open the business, and if they're investing $5,000, well, that's a substantial investment. They're putting in 100% of the value. But in practical terms, I think that would be a really tough case to get through. So those would be some of the things that would be stumbling blocks. Another issue is you could have a perfect E2 case, but if someone has a criminal record, we always have to look at that and make sure that that's not going to be a problem. Because in some cases, if someone has arrests in the past or any convictions, that may be a grounds of inadmissibility despite a picture perfect E2 case. So that's something to consider. And sometimes that's come up too, where we might have a spouse that has something in the past. And, certainly if oftentimes with an E2, it's the whole family is coming or nobody's coming. So that's always something that we have to address from the get-go to make sure that if there is anything in the background, that it's not going to be a problem. A lot of people have done things, particularly when they're young, I say kind of that young and dumb stuff. Ooh, I had an arrest when I was 23 or so, now I'm 50, nothing. It still pops up, it still comes up, and so we still have to analyze it, but it doesn't mean that because somebody had an issue in the past that it would preclude them from getting a visa. It's just something that we need to analyze from the beginning.
Yeah, okay,
good.
Good to know. What about things like ordinary life, like health insurance or buying a car, things like that? Is it different being an E2 versus an EB5? Are those pretty similar?
Well, I think just not being a U.S. citizen or a green card holder for some of those things is different. If someone is wanting to buy a house and they're here on a E2 non-immigrant visa, it is a temporary visa, and most lenders would likely require a higher down payment and different financing terms than somebody who's a U.S. citizen or has permanent residence. So you do definitely see some variables there. I think for folks on an E2 or any type of a visa coming to the U.S., it's harder sometimes to establish credit and to make purchases without a social security number. And many folks don't get a social security number until they're here with the visa. And then they, for example, somebody on an E2, they would come to the US and then go down to the Social Security Administration office, apply for the social. It can take 3-4 weeks to get that. And then they've got to start establishing credit. So that can be a little bit trickier. Driver's licenses, for example, may be issued for a different length of time for somebody on a visa than for a U.S. citizen. And each state is a little bit different with that. With the DMV in each state has different requirements. So somebody in Florida on an E2 may have some different license requirements than someone in Texas on an E2, for example. I think there's, I think people tend oftentimes to find other folks on E2s and share information. And there's a couple of groups on Facebook that are sort of E2 investor groups, or E2, people who are looking at E2s, and there's a wealth of information in some of those groups. And I think that's a great, something that would be great for an individual to join in coming to the US, because they've already got kind of a family of people who are on a similar visa, and they can, share ideas and information. And I'm happy to, provide some of those contacts for individuals that are interested.
Awesome. Okay.
I think individuals too, I often say, if somebody's from France, they're likely to find other French people. There's this, that birds of a feather flock together. If someone's from the UK, they're likely to have friends or connections in their community. And those community resources are very helpful too. People that are already here and doing it give good advice oftentimes for folks that are newer to the US. Sometimes clients will contact me and say, hey, Lisa, do you know a good dentist? And I'll say, well, I'll give you the name of my dentist. And so it's working those networks, I think.
Yeah. Tell us maybe a recent success story as we wrap up here about an E2 visa client of yours.
Okay. Thankfully, we've got a lot of success stories, so that's really, really good. I do a lot of E2s out of the London Embassy, and we have a really good track record there. We've got, maybe we've done 4 or 5 in the last few months, and, a variety of different businesses, a variety of different prices. We had one, I think, that was maybe interesting, and this is something to think about too, and I'll maybe highlight this because it brings up another issue. As I mentioned, E2 children can come in as dependents until 21, but at 21, they're no longer dependents. So if someone has a 23 or 24-year-old child, they don't qualify as a dependent, but they often say, look, the whole family's moving over. We can't leave that child, home alone, or maybe they're not in college or university, live at home, and we're doing this as a family. We have a lot of success where we may have a parent-child co-investor situation, where it might be, say, a father and son who's 23. We set up a company in the US, let's say ABC company, that father and son own 50-50. They find a business that they'd like to buy and they jointly invest in it. And then father and son come in as joint investors. And then, say for father, wife comes in and any younger children as well. And that can be done as well for, maybe a married spouse. So we've done that before, where we might have 2 investors on one visa. Sometimes there are two families that just are maybe friends or know each other well. Sometimes it's an adult child with a parent that are coming in as joint investors and both bringing their families along. And we've done that recently out of London Embassy. That was a case that came to mind just now, but I thought that kind of brings up a good point. We've done visas for all types of businesses, everything from restaurants to property management to residential cleaning businesses, pool cleaning, lawn care, retail stores, various franchises, whether those are restaurant franchises. One we did was a photography franchise. We've done some for cleaning franchises, some for packaging store type franchise businesses. A little bit of everything. One thing I think that's important, and you probably maybe more familiar with this than I am, some of the larger franchise or businesses in the US have some pretty stringent requirements about selling to only US citizens or permanent residents or green card holders. So someone that might be interested in a well-known franchise and wanting to do it on an E2 may not be able to do that. So that's something, we always have to make sure if someone's interested in a franchise that they understand from the franchise or if it's going to be possible to do it or not on an E2.
Yeah, being affiliated with hundreds of different franchises, it's interesting how many of them are extremely flexible and some of them are rather rigid on their approach to how the business is operated. And
exactly.
They even end up working with E2 visa candidates as well.
Sure.
Many franchises just don't.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
it is
good point. Mm-hmm.
Well, Lisa, if we wanted to reach out to you, learn more about your firm,
Yeah.
lisavisa.com, right?
That's my website, lisavisa.com. My email is lisa@lisavisa.com. You can go to my website, learn a little bit more about me and some of the visa types, and there's a link there to send an email or to contact our office. And then all the, the contact details are there. And as you mentioned earlier, I practice in Orlando, but I do have clients all over the country because immigration is federal law. And many times I have clients that contact me that are overseas. I always prefer to do an initial consultation to explore all the options, make sure we're going down the right path, and go through the cost, the family issues, the timing, the pros, cons, and sometimes people call and say, I want to do an E2, but maybe another visa is a better fit for them. So we go through all of that in usually a 1 hour initial consultation. And that we can do in the office if someone is here in the US or they're coming to the US to visit, we can coordinate it. Or we'll do it, much like you and I are, through video conference or Skype or phone. So happy to assist with anyone who's interested in the E2 visa or frankly any other area of family business immigration.
Awesome. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time. We've got your link in the description down below, so feel free to click there. Give us a thumbs up or a comment or a question. We'd be happy to provide an answer for you there as well. And thank you for watching us.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I enjoyed it.